Welcome to the Bookish Ventures podcast. Bookish is an online magazine dedicated to writers, book promotion, and publishing, as well as movies and screenwriters. We are here today with C.M. Rockford, who is a writer. Crockford, I am so sorry. Who is a poet, has an upcoming poetry book coming out, and is also a writer. Do you want to share a little background information about yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks for introducing me. I'm a writer and editor. I live in Brighton, Massachusetts. I originally am from Sandwich, New Hampshire. It's a little small town in the middle of nowhere. I lived in San Francisco for a long time. I've been in a few different bands, and right now I write horror fiction, poetry, music criticism, and more.
So, who's your favorite horror book writer?
Right now, in terms of working right now, actually, I really love Thomas Ligotti, but I'm also a fan of Lydia Llewellyn and Laird Barron. They're really interesting.
And what about the New England writer himself, Stephen King?
Stephen King. Stephen King's great. Stephen King's one of those people where I sometimes get really fed up with some of his shtick, but in terms of his imagination and the ability to churn out a few books a year, he's amazing. I mean, he's still doing really rewarding stuff, even in 2017. One of his recent books, Revival, was just fantastic, I thought.
I think the thing I like about Stephen King and what I think sets him apart from probably most other horror writers, and I'm going to even say horror screenplays or horror movies, is that too often they're focused on the monster and just kind of the plot, but not the character development. And to me, what makes horror horrifying is the psychological trauma that characters undergo or should be undergoing in a horror either movie or book. And Stephen King manages to do that very well because he spends a lot of time on character development.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that he's an interesting horror writer because he's so focused on the humanity of the characters. And he's talked about, in his book on writing, he talks very distinctly about what he called, or what used to be called, women's literature, which is very focused on the interior and on the psychological nature of the characters involved. And I think he really has brought that to horror writing in a way that's very distinct from cosmic horror or any of that tradition.
Yeah. So, Stephen King being from the New England area, a lot of that kind of weaves into his books. There's certainly a long history of American literature in New England. Can you talk a little bit about Boston as a literary or art scene, and if you get any inspiration from a lot of the New England authors going way back to Hawthorne and Melville?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you come from New England, you are influenced very subconsciously and through what's called psychogeography by the landscapes around you, from the surrounding area, the mountains, the forest, the woods, the sense of the dark heart of things where you can't go, or your suspicions of the people around you, which goes back to the Puritans, this fear of the other, the fear of everybody around you destroying you, which is a very understandable fear, but also comes from a very often bigoted and horrible place. And that's the source of more horror in and of itself, is The Witch really showed.
Oh, that movie you're talking about. The recent movie.
It's very New England. It's a New England story.
Yeah, I recently saw that.
Quite accurate.
Yeah, I recently saw that.
Yeah,
it was pretty amazing. My husband didn't get it. And I'm like, but but he's not necessarily into early American literature either. No. But it's Hawthorne wrote after the Salem witch trials, of course, but he was writing about something that was very ingrained and almost he was kind of writing about cultural trauma. And the Puritans and their fear of evil, and then they had to contend. So they had their religion, which made them very fearful of evil, and they constantly thought about evil. They were constantly checking their actions, and if they did something that was outside the bounds of societal norms, and they thought it was evil. So there was this constant, every day they just thought about doing evil or somebody committing evil against them. And then coupled with the fact that they're colonialist, and there are Native Americans who do not want them on that land. And they, at the beginning of the movie of The Witch, they had, they left the enclosure of the settlement when him and his family were leaving to go be off on their own. And it was a big walled structure that enclosed the settlement. So there was very much this idea of an us versus them, and they were constantly afraid of the Native Americans, and the Native Americans were out in the woods, those dark and dangerous woods. So, yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a funny thing because I definitely have that Puritan blood in my veins, but I really, as people, the Puritans don't really do much for me because, it's really easy to forget that the Puritans were essentially religious fanatics who left their country because they were perceived as kind of insane, which frankly I think they were up to a point. People who go to church for hours a day, I just view with some great suspicion. I appreciate their intensity and fervor, but when that results in butchering people, including Quakers and Native Americans, you sort of run into a problem there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You kind of get taught the nice side of them in school, but really, you kind of understand why they left their country, because people did not care for them.
Yeah, and as I recall, they didn't actually call themselves Puritans. It was
Sure.
It was sort of like in England, it was sort of like a way to make fun of them. Oh, they're so pure, Puritans. But they were definitely a religious extremist. But there's been a lot of religious extremists. This country was founded by religious extremism, to be perfectly honest with you, which I think is interesting that we're now like at war with religious extremists, even though this country was founded by religious extremists. But the one thing that the Puritans, there was a positive aspect to the Puritans, and this is the thing that I think where modern America may be most divergent from the Puritans, and that's the fact that they were literary. I mean, don't get me wrong, they weren't into reading all different kinds of books that was available at that time. The main book they read was the Bible. However, they really imbibed the literary side of the Bible, at least the King James Version. And they also, what was it, Cotton Mather, with his, he was a preacher, and his sermons, which, you read them. I don't know if you read them in your American literature classes or stuff. They are actually very well written and literary. And I think that's kind of where Hawthorne was coming from with A Scarlet Letter. I mean, they've sort of inflicted this cultural trauma on us, but at the same time, they are the foundation of American literature, the beginning of American literature.
Yeah, I mean, if you read Cotton Mather's and Roger Williams' sermons, they're very terrifying, but quite beautiful. I mean, they are kind of horror literature, especially the descriptions of of America, not just the Puritans, at least the founders of modern America after the indigenous peoples are the Jamestown Indians, who, were looking for gold. So it's worth noting that the founders of America are are religious extremists and basically capitalists. Really, when the Trump election happened, in a horrible way, it's a return to American values, just of the worst kind.
Agreed. So let's talk about modern New England. What's it like there, arts-wise, literary-wise? Is there a good, thriving culture there for arts and literature?
I would say that. There's a really big kind of art scene here and a counterculture of sorts. There's like an organization called the Boston Hassle that puts together shows, and there's a zine culture here and a lot of different stuff going on. There's there's a zine that does like horror literature called Death Wound.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of metal themed horror literature, but a lot of the shows here too, like I can't say I feel a great sense of kinship with them. It's a lot of kind of art music and noise rock, which I like up to a point, but I don't really enjoy seeing it live after a certain point. There's a good scene here, but a lot of it's college oriented, and after a certain point, you feel a little too old to be part of it. I'm 25, so I'm at a point now where I don't necessarily want to go to, watch two people hitting a keyboard a bunch,
I don't know if I was ever an age where I wanted to see that.
Yeah, you get bored of it after, 10 shows just watching, weird stuff happening. But, there's definitely a thriving live scene here, which is really positive and healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been, I've worked through that. There's also a pretty good horror literature scene. There are a lot of writers around here, writing workshops you could take. There's even like a Boston Horror Society of sorts that meets up regularly.
So what are you currently reading right now?
Right now, I actually just read Runaway Horses by Yukio Mishima, which is part of this tetralogy he wrote before he killed himself in 1970. But I'm trying to start Ubik by Phil K. Dick, and I'm kind of running into trouble for some reason.
Having trouble getting into it?
Getting that style again. I love Phil K. Dick, but it's hard getting back into that style.
Gotcha.
He's very peculiar, as a writer.
He is a very, very unique voice, and I think probably one of our best science fiction writers.
Oh God, yeah, he was a genius. No question. Remarkable mind. I don't know how he thought like that. Very funny too. Very dry sense of humor.
And he has a brand of science fiction that I like, because there's other science fiction that I don't. And I'm blanking on his name right now. He wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, Arthur C. Clarke.
Arthur C. Clarke. I love Arthur C. Clarke. I loved reading that book. I've watched that movie like 10 times, and every time I'm like, wow, this is cool.
That's a great movie. I read a good piece recently on how the Bowie song "Oh You Pretty Things" was probably inspired by Arthur C. Clarke.
Oh, really?
Yeah, his book Childhood End is apparently very similar approach, like alien children coming down to the human race.
That is interesting. I'll have to do a little more research on that. But yeah, Philip K. Dick and Arthur C. Clarke, what I like about their science fiction writing is that it's actually science-y and it's also intellectual. It really makes you think. Whereas there's other science fiction that it's just like, okay, so we're just going to have these spaceships, and it's pretty much just, a Western, but in outer space or something. I don't know. But they usually don't get me thinking about things. And that's what I like about science fiction, is that really addresses, you know, issues with humanity in general.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is why I love J.G. Ballard. He's one of my favorite writers right now because his science fiction isn't particularly sciencey. He doesn't really seem to care much about science fiction. He's more interested in psychological process and sort of a primitivism that that the mind kind of draws back to when the modern world is too overwhelming, or how our minds can kind of merge with modernism.
Are there any good places that you like to go to in Boston to just read? I actually lived in Boston for about 4 years. I used to go to Boston Common, where the swan boats are. There's a bunch of benches there, and of course I'd have to have Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah, I'd sit there like on a Sunday afternoon and read. There was definitely always a lot of tourists over in that area.
I was just there last night, actually, in the Commons, but it's one book, so it's funny you mentioned that on a date. It was good, but I don't like reading outside. It's a funny thing with me. It's too distracting. I like the interiorness of being inside and reading a book away from everything, but I do read on the train a lot, and I'll read in coffee shops sometimes. If I'm particularly bored, I want to go outside.
Yeah, when I was in Boston, that was one of the interesting things I immediately noticed about the city when I was, riding the T. People were reading like serious literature. They were reading like Crime and Punishment, or Marcel Proust, or they were just reading serious stuff and it wasn't just like one or two people. It just seemed like everybody was reading literature. I found it interesting because when I moved to LA for like a brief short weeks, I had to use public transportation, and virtually nobody reads on public transportation in Los Angeles. And if they do, it's like James Patterson.
Yeah, probably. That sounds about right. Well, yeah, Boston's a very, learned city. Unfortunately, we can't learn about some issues here, but nevertheless, it is a learned city, I guess, in some ways or another.
Yeah, well, there's 48 colleges and universities just in the Boston area, so
That's right.
I guess it's gonna impact the overall intellectual quotient of the city.
Also, it snows here like 5 months a year, so you have to read inside and do stuff. You don't have a choice. Once it's nice out, you're gonna go outside.
Yeah, I know. I hear people make these arguments, but I grew up in Southern California, and it was almost always like 80 degrees. Yeah, I was never outside. I was always inside reading.
Yeah, of course, you're used to it, but if you're like me and you don't get to go outside very much, you're like, oh my God, the light burns. But also, I was in a very educated family. I taught myself how to read. My sister read to me as a very young kid. I think I learned to read when I was like 3 years old, something like that. 3 or 4. So.
Yeah, I think I was about 3 too, and I do recall like the first book. It was called "A Duck is a Duck." It was some reader. And the first line was like, "A duck is a duck." I just thought that was, and I ended up majoring in philosophy, but I just thought like that was the most profound statement ever. Like, a duck is a duck, but it's not a goose. I think it got me thinking about what exactly is a duck and what makes a duck a duck. I don't know if that was the point to make me think about those things. I think it was just meant to be a simple sentence, but
it's kind of a way to start off with subjectivity and objectivity, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about poetry. You're a poet. You have a poetry book coming up. I want to talk a little bit about the poetry market, but first I want to hear from you. about some of your favorite poets, because again, New England being has a lot of them that came out of there.
Yeah, sure. Some of my favorite poets are actually tend to be from outside the United States, like Federico Garcia Lorca. Pablo Neruda is a favorite of mine. Love Williams Carlos Williams. Keats is beautiful. Very beautiful writer. There's one, oh god, what's her name? Sharon Olds. Sharon Olds is great. She's a recent one that I actually really like. I tend not to like recent poetry, and she's quite good.
What about Robert Lowell?
I haven't really read Robert Lowell. I have a problem with poetry, which is funny because like I just don't read enough poetry, and it's a serious problem I have. But I actually have a Yeats collection right here next to me that I'm meaning to start very soon. So that's my plan.
Well, you have, he's definitely one of my favorite poets. He, I just think he's just so talented, and there's a lot of tension in his poetry. And I'm going to say something that's probably not very popular, but I hear a lot about Maya Angelou and her poetry. And she actually came, when I was an undergrad, came to my college and spoke. I didn't go, but it seemed like the rest of the campus actually went to go see her talk. And the reason why is because I don't like her poetry. But one of the things that... one of the things that's really missing in her poetry is tension. And that's what Yeats does really well. But then also Maya Angelou, it just seems like, I don't know. I don't know if this is the right word, but it almost seems like propaganda. It's like, oh, a woman is, I don't even remember the poem, something about a woman is this, a woman's wonderful, a woman's that. I'm like, well, okay, I understand it's a well-intentioned poem, but really, are all women wonderful?
No, that's the thing. And I understand that Maya Angelou is meant to be performed, but I'm going to be honest, like, I hate spoken word for the most part, and I don't like slam poetry. Like, I don't like that, like, there's no aesthetic or, like, artistry in a lot of that poetry. Like, much of it is meant to be said out loud, and it's supposed to be liberatory, but, like, that doesn't mean much when your poem isn't very good. So...
I hope we don't get a bunch of hate comments about that one, but because I know she's really popular, but yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So I have to ask you, what are your thoughts on Sylvia Plath, if you even read her poetry? Here's my thing. I got really caught up with her in undergrad. I actually think she's one of the most stunning, talented lyric poets to come out of the U.S., right up there, I think, with Emily Dickinson. But I think Sylvia Plath gets a really bad rap because, one, she had a cheating husband and then committed suicide, and then she seems to get associated with, I don't know, female teenage angst, like, they read her poetry and then cut their arm or something. I don't know. But that she seems to get a bad rap for that. So do you have any thoughts on Sylvia Plath?
I like Plath. I'm a big fan of the Bill. I like the lyric poetry quite a lot. Yeah, I think I don't really like the cult around Plath, to be honest, because I think it's a bit exaggerated. And to be honest, I've read some of Hughes' poetry, and I actually really like it. And I think he gets a bit of a bad rap for being married to her and cheating on her. And I think basically, I don't know. I don't know what to feel about the man, but, like, I don't think he deserves to be as hated as passionately as he is. So I'm skeptical about the cult, absolutely. It's a lot of writers are like that. Like Bukowski or Thompson, where the people who follow them are kind of obnoxious about it,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know how to keep it down, and they try to model themselves on guys who are really abrasive and awful, but good writers. So, Plath is great, though. I'm a big fan. Beljar is a really profound, piece of writing on depression and on kind of this endless need for meaning, which I thought was very beautiful.
Yeah, Beljar, definitely a highly influential book to me. I think she managed to write about mental illness, especially in a time period where it was really not something you were supposed to necessarily talk about and discuss. Um, but I also think she did it in an unsappy way, and also with a lot of honesty. Because I've read, I don't know if you read this, but it was The Unquiet Mind. I forget. Catherine Jameson, is that her name? No, she's a psychologist, and she has bipolar, and she wrote a book, The Unquiet Mind. She's actually a very good writer, and she crafts some very beautiful sentences. And people are like, "Oh, well, this is such a highly influential book. She takes the mystery out of bipolar." And I'm like, but I really see a little bit of dishonesty here, because seems like every relationship she ever had was wonderful and amazing, and everybody was so supportive of her. And I'm like, okay, if you have a mental illness, especially if it's bipolar depression, you are not going to have smooth, awesome relationships your whole life.
No, probably not. Realistically. I mean, yeah, I haven't read Jameson actually, but you probably have a point. I mean, yeah, that's the thing with Flash, no sentiment. Lady Lazarus has no sentiment in it. It is almost beautifully cold. It's harsh.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a great book.
So let's talk about your poetry. When did you start writing poetry?
Oh, wow. I mean, probably when I was in high school. That's when eighth grade. I started really in eighth grade. A lot of the poems are terrible. As they will be when you're 14 or 15. And I wrote off and on, for a long time, poetry. And I wrote movie criticism for a little bit when I was a kid, and I wasn't that great at it, but I was okay. I wrote music reviews. I still write music reviews for punknews.org, and I'm starting writing for No Recess magazine, which is a new online magazine you can pick up. You can find the website. And so, I've done that for a long time, off and on. I've only really started writing more intensely in the past few years, especially in terms of fiction and poetry.
So you have a poetry book coming out this summer, is that correct?
Yeah, chapbook. It'll be called Adore. I am currently trying to figure out the layout. I'm basically publishing it myself, and Mass Love Distro is going to distribute it around New England, so eventually you'll be able to order it off their website.
That is pretty cool. So do you think there's a market in the U.S. for poetry?
Not really. No, and that's okay. I mean, there doesn't necessarily have to be. I think poetry is a very small little corner of American writing these days. As my culture professor told me, you're not going to make any money out of poetry. You're very lucky to make a book. And that will sell something, but you won't be able to make a living off the part. You'll teach. Which I never wanted to do, so here I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that poetry still has an audience. I'm a little skeptical about the current state of poetry because I think a lot of it is devoid of quality sometimes. I think they're meant for specific audiences, and I think they're often used as sort of voices for people who feel marginalized, which is great, but then, frankly, a lot of the poetry involved isn't that good, which is a problem. I'm sure much more articulate people have spoken about this than I have, but that is sort of a problem to me with a lot of writing, especially about politics, is that there's a certain artlessness to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recall back in my 20s, I was part of a writing group out in LA, and there were several people that decided to show up every week with poems. They were all horrible.
Yep.
The biggest issue was they thought poetry was about, painting a pretty picture. And there was this woman, she must have been in her 40s, maybe early 50s, who came every week to the group. And she had this 8-line poem that was apparently, when she was in 8th grade, she was sitting in her classroom and she looked outside and a storm started brewing, and that's it. And so it's just like 8 lines describing I don't know, the diamond flex and I can't even remember what stuff she used. And I'm like, okay, what is the point of this?
Exactly. You don't have anything to say, or you don't actually write poems. You just write short little sentences that are cut to pieces. Like, this is a controversial statement, again, with a controversy. I hate Milk and Honey by Ripley Tower. Hate it. I hate that book. I cannot stand that book. The poetry is just terrible. It's just not good. I don't care if the sentiment involved. It's fine, but, the writing's just bad.
I haven't read it, so now I'm going to have to check it out.
Yeah, I'm going to get death threats for that because she has a wide Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter following, and yeah, here I am. Shoot.
Yeah, but here's what I've noticed is that, and working with a lot of self-published authors and also doing publishing myself through my company, there's a lot of really bad writing out there. But here's the thing. Some really bad writing sells really well. In fact, there's a lot of bad writing that sells really well. And case in point, 50 Shades of Grey. Horrible. Yeah. I don't think I got past page 30. It was just, I'm like, oh my God, this is horrible. And this needed to be edited. It needed a lot of rewriting and reworking. But hey, what do I know? It's only like, a multi-million-dollar establishment now.
Yeah, that's the thing. Those movies make so much money. The books make money, Yeah, that's the thing. Self-publishing is weird because I think there's some good people in that world, but a lot of self-published books, like I hear self-published and I'm like, oh no. Like I don't want to read that. And that's the sort of problem, isn't it? A lot of bad writing is out there. A lot of good ones too, diamonds in the rough.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of bad books, but I would say the biggest grievance is, well, there's 2 grievances. One, sure, they don't get somebody to edit their manuscript, or even proofread it for that matter. And 2, a lot of it is self-indulgent. Totally. What I don't like is when people come in thinking, okay, so here's the plot. This, and this is going to happen, and we're going to talk about, this because it's really big right now. And there I'm going to write it. I think the best fiction needs to be personal. And I realize I just said that that you shouldn't be self-indulgent. So there's really a balance. It needs to be, yeah, it needs to be artistically authentic to you and your voice. But at the same time, not being self-indulgent and just being like, oh, I can just, write the most marvelous, monologues that go on for 4 pages. I'm so brilliant, but without any idea, like, okay, so how's the reader gonna react to this?
Well, 2 things for me there are, one, in terms of editing, yeah. I mean, writing is about cut. You have to cut. Like when I write drafts, like what I do with the first draft is I just start like scrolling through the words, taking out what needs to be taken out, seeing what needs to be added, going through it. And of course, I'm imperfect. And one thing I'll say is that I do sympathize with, as I write more, I do sympathize with people who don't get editing for their manuscripts because it's such an ego thing. It's such a personal thing because when people tell you the problems, your heart kind of sinks a bit, doesn't it? It hurts to hear like, well, here's the problems here. You did this wrong. It's like working on a yard for hours and then getting told that you didn't get the branches right.
Right.
Yeah, and then the other thing too is that I forgot what I was going to say. Oh my god.
Hey, it happens. I do it like at least 20 times a day. So, so how can people learn more about you? Do you have a website? Do you have a blog? Where can they get links to your articles?
Yeah, absolutely. So I write for punksnews.org. It's one site that carries my reviews. I've done a lot of work there. I different albums, just writing pieces. I also, I'm writing for No Recess magazine very soon. They're an upcoming little site, run by Dan Light. He's a very good music critic. And then, so my short stories have been published in a few different areas. My short stories and poems have been published in a few different places. One recent one is Dark Gothic Resurrected, which you can buy on Amazon. That's an anthology little magazine. And then another one is coming up, and it should be in The Weird Traveler, if all does well. So my poetry can be found in a few different places. One's coming up in Paradise and Limbo magazine. But I'm in a few different places, so you can find me pretty much anywhere. And then I have a Facebook page, just facebook.com/CM Crockford.
Right, and let's be clear, it's CM Crockford. I messed up. I'm sorry. I said Rockford. All right. Well, it has been great talking with you. And I hope to hear from you more. We do have a segment called Write Bites, and I would love it to. They're just short talks about a topic, and I would love to do one on poetry with you.
That'd be great. Thank you so much. This is amazing.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Have a good one.